arrest. It's Wednesday here on The Story, and tonight we have new details on the first arrest under a new law targeting drug use on public transit. Our team is live in just a few minutes. Plus, why the city of Portland is pausing homeless camp removals next week. But first, we have a major update on a story we have covered closely here on the show for well over a year now. Tainted Waters near the city of Boardman. It's our big story tonight. This week, Governor Kotek issued this executive order declaring a state of emergency in Morrow and Umatilla counties due to risk of economic shutdown. The order allows the Port of Morrow to violate its wastewater permit for the next 6 weeks, starting today, to keep that economic engine of the region operating. Port officials claim that heavy winter rains have overloaded their wastewater lagoons, apparently leaving them with two options: either pump some of the contaminated water on nearby farm fields, which would violate their DEQ permit because it's the non-growing season, or potentially furlough, so temporarily lay off thousands of workers. The logic being, if the food processing plants and other industries can't dump their wastewater into the port's lagoons, they can't operate. Now, if you've followed this saga on the show since Pat Doris started reporting on it in late 2023, you know there are a lot of factors at play here. But for the rest of you who may just be learning about our Tainted Waters series, let's get you up to speed. More than 30 years ago, the state of Oregon discovered a massive aquifer covering 562 square miles near the town of Boardman is contaminated with nitrates. The chemical you cannot see, taste, or smell is harmful for people above limits set by the EPA, especially infants and pregnant women. Many wells in the area have nitrate levels above those limits, mostly belonging to people with low income. In the affected area called the Lower Umatilla Basin Groundwater Management Area, or LUBGWAMA, as many as 4,500 wells have drilled down through the earth to get water from the contaminated aquifer for cooking and bathing and drinking and more. But over the decades, nitrates from farm fertilizer, commercial food production, and large animal operations have seeped down into the water, making the contamination worse. And for decades, the state relied mostly on voluntary actions to try and stop the contamination. But that didn't work. The problem got worse. In September, the state released a plan to do something about it. Part of that plan was for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality to update and modernize wastewater permits to minimize nitrates leaching into the groundwater. And at that time, the port said it would stop spreading nitrate-laden water during the winter season, starting in late 2025, which is a year earlier than they had originally planned. That would be possible at that point because a massive storage lagoon for that wastewater is set to be complete by this summer. The port is also working to build infrastructure to eventually remove the nitrates from the water before it's spread on farm fields. That part is still several years away. So the Oregon Health Authority has been offering free well testing for people in the area. And if those tests come back showing high levels of nitrates, some are getting free filter systems, while others are getting clean water delivered to their front door. But let's get back to this latest wrinkle this week: the governor's executive order allowing the port to violate its wastewater permit for the next 6 weeks to avoid shutting down operations. The governor wrote in a statement, "My office has heard directly from producers and farmers in the Lower Umatilla Basin that pausing operations even for a short time in February would be devastating to the local economy and potentially shut down some operations permanently. This would result in lost jobs for community members across the region." Her executive order says that around 6,000 employees rely on the port's operations. But when it comes to the contamination and potentially making it worse, now is the worst time for wastewater with nitrates to be spread onto fields. When the water is spread during the non-growing season, so in other words, now, the risk of contaminating the groundwater is higher because there aren't many plants there to soak up the nitrates into their roots to help them grow. Now, it's worth noting, this is nothing new. The Port of Morrow has been a chronic violator of its wastewater permits. An Oregon Capitol Chronicle investigation found the port had thousands Thousands of violations for at least 17 of the last 18 years, many for spreading too much wastewater, racking up millions in fines from the Oregon DEQ. The governor's order allows the port to avoid any more of those kinds of fines over the next 6 weeks, as long as the wastewater they spread is only sloped away from any domestic wells or in fields designated as low risk for contamination. As you might imagine, the port is happy with the order. A statement from the executive director reads, "The port appreciates Governor Kotek's emergency order to keep our region's economy running with low risk to groundwater as we proceed with our industrial wastewater treatment and water storage project." We asked for an interview with Lisa today, and we were told she was in meetings all day and unavailable. But we did catch up with the leader of a group called Water for Eastern Oregon. It's made up of farmers and businesses who operate in or near the affected area. Justin Green, he is the executive director. He's the former DEQ statewide water quality administrator. And he says the governor's executive order is the right move.
We think it was a very necessary step to make sure that the port can continue operations. We're happy to see that the executive order does not pose a threat to groundwater. The port was able to provide data via modeling studies and reports to show that the limited flexibility shown in the executive order will not negatively impact groundwater. The port and businesses associated with the port provide over 6,700 jobs in the area. And there's an estimated $2.3 million in estimated daily economic output from the port and businesses doing business with the port. And I think it's really important to highlight that this isn't balancing or choosing economics over the environment. The executive order, once again, relies on science to show that the fields identified in the executive order can safely receive recycled water without negatively impacting groundwater.
Now, Governor Kotek did bring up that delicate balance with this issue, adding in her statement, "I did not make this decision lightly. We must balance protecting thousands of jobs in the region, the national food supply, and domestic well users during this short period of time during an unusually wet winter." Again, the port saying because of all the rain, their wastewater lagoons are full and they need to get rid of some of that water in order to keep operations going. So let's bring in Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino now to look at the rain there so far this winter. So Matt, has it been unusually wet there, just like the governor says?
Yeah, up until about the first of the year, it has been wet. Just like here on the west side, we're going through this dry period right now, but that's a temporary thing. So let's check out the numbers over at the Port of Morrow, which is where I put that red circle. The data is from Boardman, but it's 2 miles away. So that's a good source of data. Good long period of record in Boardman, goes back over 50 years, the data does. So high confidence in the averages here. November, little over 2 inches of rain. Now, for Westsiders, that may not sound like a lot, but for the east side, that's a lot. That's 192%, nearly double the average for the month of November. December, even more, nearly 4 inches of rain, and that's nearly 3 times the average for the month. So again, the absolute values may not sound a lot like a lot to us here on the west side, but for Eastern Oregon, that's a lot of rain. You got to keep in mind the average rainfall here is just a little over 8 inches a year, and for 2024, they had nearly 12 inches of rain, making it the 4th wettest year on record in 2024. So yes, 2024, the end of it especially, has been very wet. We're only 15 days into January, a lot of time for more rainfall this winter. So what does the forecast look like? Well, this is from the Climate Prediction Center, and this is a classic La Nina pattern showing chances for above average precipitation across most of Oregon, including Boardman and the Port of Morrow, is what we're looking at for January, February, and March. That's one forecast. Here's another one. This is from the folks down at Scripps Institute of Oceanography down in San Diego. These are the guys that do a lot of really great work on atmospheric rivers. Their forecast is a bit different, showing above average precipitation in Central California, which would be great for California, of course, and in Oregon, no big signal, no great signal towards really wet or really dry. If I had to put odds on this, I'd say more than likely we'll have average to somewhat above average precipitation statewide, including Eastern Oregon. Blair?
All right, Matt, thank you for that. So now, as you might imagine, not everyone is thrilled about the governor's order, including Oregon Rural Action, a group in the lower Umatilla Basin trying to help the people with the wells who are living with contaminated water. So joining us now live is Caleb Lay, the Director of Policy and Research with Oregon Rural Action. Caleb, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Blair.
All right, so let's get right to it. What are your takeaways from this executive order?
Yeah, it gives us no joy to say this, but this seems like a truly devastating and misguided decision by Governor Kotek. This is just going to result in more of this highly contaminated and untreated wastewater being dumped in an area that is already seriously devastated by nitrate contamination. And it's going to remove what few guardrails are still in place for this winter. And those guardrails have been whittled away over the last year by the Port of Morrow, spreading on more land, changing the rules that they violated last winter when they violated their permit almost 900 times.
So how does Oregon Rural Action balance the desire to clean up this contamination with the governor saying thousands could be furloughed if she didn't allow the port to move some of this wastewater?
Sure, yeah, and nobody wants any sort of furloughs or anything like that. But frankly, I think it's a false choice to say that we have to choose between having jobs and having clean water. In the earlier segment, Justin pointed to the fact that the Port of Morrow is an incredibly economically powerful entity, particularly here in Eastern Oregon, maybe the most powerful economic entity this side of the state. $2.3 million in daily economic output. It seems to me that we could invest some of that in keeping workers' wages coming at them, keeping food on the table and roofs over their heads, or invest some of that in accelerating the pace of treating this wastewater, in building the storage, and in managing this wastewater responsibly so that the port can start being a good neighbor instead of a bad actor.
So your group was quoted as criticizing this move, saying it's, quote, moving the goalpost to allow industry to dump poisoned water on our land. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely, yeah. Over the last, even going back to the turn of this millennium, over the last 25 years or so, we have seen the state allow the port to spread this wastewater over more and more land, increasing its footprint to spread more and more wastewater and to violate its permit literally thousands of times. Just last winter, over the course of 80 days of operation, 81 days, I believe, they violated their permit 881 times. That would never be tolerated anywhere but a sacrifice zone. And that's exactly what the lower Umatilla Basin has been turned into. Despite that, since we've seen the state become more and more involved over the last 2 years, and we have seen the goalposts get moved back, changing the 30-pound rule just this fall, changing one of those rules that the port has violated hundreds of times. And now, just on the heels of that decision to revoke that rule, now we're saying essentially there are going to be no guardrails and the port is going to be allowed to pollute with impunity for the next several weeks for the rest of this winter. And frankly, it seems a bit backwards to say that we should be removing guardrails when fields are already saturated with water and unable to take more loading. The governor's own press release, frankly, explains the reasons why this shouldn't happen.
Talk to me about the state plan to reduce contamination that was released last year. What do you think? It will lead to meaningful change, or is the state continuing to kick the contaminated can, if you will, down the road?
Frankly, I think it's a plan to make a plan. I have characterized it as a bit of a reminting of the plans that have been in place since 1990 when this groundwater management area was designated. There are a lot of concessions made in the nitrate reduction plan saying that the state doesn't have the funding, that agencies don't have the staff, that they will need more legislation or more rulemaking to actually be able to enforce existing laws. And ultimately, that is all we want. That is all the community members that we work with who are polluted, who have been devastated by this pollution and only found out in the last couple of years. All anyone wants is for the state to enforce the law and to hold polluters accountable. Some of these polluters, they rack up profits every quarter, measuring in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And in the last year or two have spent tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on cash dividends to their shareholders and stock buybacks. All we are asking is that those profits be used to solve this problem. Polluters seem to consistently get everything they want at the drop of a hat. And meanwhile, those who are affected by the pollution are told to wait their turn, to wait patiently, to sit by and just wait for the state to get a handle on this. It's incredibly frustrating. And in a place where the population is disproportionately low income, disproportionately non-English speaking, and disproportionately marginalized and vulnerable, It is incredibly frustrating to see this sacrifice zone continue to be exacerbated.
All right, well, Caleb, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Blair.
Well, now it's your turn to weigh in. Do you approve of the governor's executive order? Do you think it will lead to more contamination in the area? We're especially interested in hearing from those of you who live out near Boardman. Email us thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090. Well, turning now to the city of Portland, where this week the first person was arrested for using hard drugs on public transit. This comes after a new law went into effect early this month, making smoking and using drugs like fentanyl on TriMet buses and trains a Class A misdemeanor. Alma McCarty is live at a TriMet stop at the convention center. Alma, help us break down the details of this case.
Yeah, well, Blair, yesterday morning, a sergeant with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office in plain clothes, working a mission undercover, got onto a MAX train here at the Convention Center Transit Station. And really his mission was specifically to track down and go after folks who may be using drugs on board these trains. Now, once on the MAX, he sat in the back and saw a couple of people sleeping on the floor, noting a woman who was awake. According to court documents, she stayed on as they traveled towards Gateway, then while fidgeting with something in her lap, hid her face in her jacket. Now the sergeant got closer and then saw her light up and smelled the chemical odor of fentanyl. He alerted other transit deputies and they took the woman into custody without incident. This afternoon, I spoke with the deputy DAs who are handling the case. Now, both said while it's a matter of accountability, it's also a way to get people the help they might need.
A lot of the individuals in our community, they're out there by themselves. They're not able to get connection to services. By coming through the criminal justice system, they're able then to be set up with services that should allow them and provide them the opportunity to correct their path in life.
I don't think jail would be a default resolution to most of these cases. Generally in Multnomah County, I do see probationary terms be the desired outcome for a Class A misdemeanor. So that's the expectation I would have for these cases.
Now, they tell me that their goal really with all of this is to make TriMet and other public transit just a safer and better place for all riders. At 11, I spoke with some of the riders who have mixed reactions about this new law. Blair, back to you.
All right, Alma, thanks so much. Well, coming up next on The Story, why the city of Portland is pausing homeless camp removals next week. And I have an update on the homeless woman I met on the streets yesterday, desperate to find shelter. That's coming up next when The Story returns. Well, just into the newsroom a couple of hours ago, the city of Portland is pausing all homeless camp removals for a week starting on Monday. That's because the point-in-time count is happening next week. It's required by the federal government for communities to spend a day once a year counting the number of people experiencing homelessness. The count in Multnomah County is led by Portland State University's Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative. Camp removals will resume after that on January 28th. Now to an update on a story I brought you last night on this 26-year-old homeless woman named Andy. She stays in a tent under a 205 overpass in Southeast Portland. She told me the lengths she's gone and will go to try and find housing, nothing short of flagging down police officers and considering setting her own tent on fire so she can connect with first responders. Her story touched many of you, and you let us know. Rich wrote, the fact that she is flagging down police cars, trying to get help, and that she thought about setting her camp on fire to get anyone to notice her and give her help is a little scary. Life in the camps and the people who live with their daily desperation is the real story. Thanks for the report. Kate chimed in. She says it's shameful that this young woman has been trying hard to find shelter, but apparently has been blown off by people who are supposed to be trying to help her. And Carmen said, I was so touched by your follow through with the 26-year-old woman living on Foster. As a resident of Lentz, of course, I'm horrified by the sheer number of people living on the streets or in RVs, but it's important to remember that they are people too. I hope your segment reminds other Portlanders too. And Carmen, that is why we work so hard to hear from these people, because as you said, they are people too. And as I mentioned last night, it's rare to find someone that willing to go into shelter. So I reached out to the mayor's spokesperson, who also works closely with the city's outreach team, and I told him about Andy. He said there are currently no tiny homes available. However, he tells me this temporary overnight shelter for women that opened earlier this month includes 50 beds in Portland's Old Town neighborhood and could be an option for Andy, or the city could reserve a congregate shelter for her. The mayor's spokesperson told me Andy is on their list, and he let the outreach team know. I'll keep following this, and hopefully we can help get Andy inside. Well, still to come on the story, how Portland police are getting ready for Inauguration Day on Monday, what you should expect to see if you're heading downtown, and what they're saying about pre-planned demonstrations they already know about. That's when the story returns. On Monday, President-elect Donald Trump will be sworn into office. And on that day, Portlanders can expect to see high police presence throughout the city. Officers have been prepping for potential unrest. Back in 2017, during Trump's first inauguration, thousands flooded Portland streets. Today, Chief Bob Day talked about what's being done ahead of Monday. Let's bring in Celine Stevens. Celine, what can we expect?
Blair, well, Chief Bob Day said this plan was set into motion back in November. So we're looking at activating unified command, and we're seeing higher staffing, higher police visibility on the streets, collaborating with Oregon State Police and even federal partners like the FBI if needed.
So, Celine, in the past, we know people who have acted out in violent protests have faced few repercussions. Now, I understand you heard from the new district attorney, Nathan Vasquez, today. So will people face consequences if things turn ugly?
Definitely, and Multnomah County District Attorney Nathan Vasquez made a point to say that today. In fact, he said that the right to protest does not include the right to vandalize, and those that do will be prosecuted.
This definitely checks with what we've seen come from DA Vasquez so far in his first few days in office. He's definitely coming out of the gate strong. All right, so Celine, officers are prepping for Monday. Are they anticipating anything happening before then?
So they already have their eye on 3 planned events that are going to be happening somewhere in downtown and the inner east side areas. They say they've already made contact with those groups and will be keeping a close eye on them in the days to come. All
right, Celine Stevens downtown for us tonight. Thank you. Well, that is the end of our show, folks. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, you can stream the story on your own schedule. Just download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. I hope you enjoy your Wednesday night. We've made it over the hump. We're almost to Friday. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.